the strongest of the big four sauropods in Jurassic World is something hotly debated time and time again. But what about who's the weakest? Not if the Giga could beat the Indom, or if the Indom could beat the Giga, or if even Rexy's plot armor could stand a chance, but who is the weakest? Who, more times than not, would simply lose in a 1v1 encounter with the rest of the big four? And I'm here to answer that question today. Who is the weakest of the big four? And spoiler alert, it's the Spinosaurus. Now, before you call me crazy...
Crazy? I was crazy once. They locked me in a room. A rubber room with rats. And rats make me crazy.
Let me explain. We're going to go over 3.5 factors today. We're going to start off with the basic length, height, and weight, and just general sizes for these characters, and debunking any misconceptions that are commonly noted for them. B, general inverse scaling to compare their feats and statements they have on one another. We'll be somewhat covering over the destructive feats they perform, since while it doesn't matter with things such as inverse, it is something people do like to consistently mention, so we might as well just kind of bring it up from a more general perspective. And lastly, their fighting styles, experience, battle IQ. So, starting off with their length, height, and weight, since this is a pretty easy baseline, Spino is unironically the smallest, sadly, amongst what some other people may think. While Spino, as of JP3, had statements of being the largest land carnivore, not only are those statements even arguable with JP1 Rexy sizes, which we'll get into in a minute, those statements have just been overruled with the Indominus and the Giga both having more current statements and more consistent statements of having the same thing. Even if you don't think these statements would apply to Indom for some reason, due to the Giga, they should at least apply to the time where the Spinosaurus was still alive. But that's more of a separate discussion between the Indom versus the Giganotosaurus. But let's go into numbers, that's what people care about. And while I do want to note some of these numbers are generally somewhat interchangeable, these are more just general weights, just general sizes. I know people are very picky about the sizes for a lot of these dinosaurs, so that's why I'm trying to be a bit more broad. But to start off with the most simple, Rexy's actually very consistently, at least at her peak, 20 feet tall, 9 tons, and 40 feet long. This is blatantly stated several times, so this one's the most believable one out of the bunch. Giga is likely between 20 to 22 feet tall and 50 feet in length, and between 11 and 15 tons. This is once again something pretty consistently stated, and this makes sense since we know it's a lot bigger and heavier than Rexy, who's already, as we just mentioned, 20 feet tall regardless and 9 tons, as well as 40 feet long, so it's not that big of a stretch to say once again the Giga, who's already much bigger than the Rex, or at least somewhat bigger, should be just in these ranges of power. Indom's weight is really inconsistent. It's been stated to be anywhere from 6 to 7 to even 10 tons. It's likely 20 plus feet, as the original data for it was supposed to be 20 feet, but we know via the statements in the movie that it actually exceeded its growth rate and grew much larger than intended, and likely between 50 to 55 feet long. It's a little lighter than Rexy most likely, or the same, but either the same, it's very much longer and at least the same, or taller than Rexy. Compared to Spino is admittedly somewhat inconsistent, but around 16 feet tall, 10 plus tons, and 40 either less and more feet. Spino's length is pretty inconsistent, sadly. The CC size chart actually directly shows Rexy in the Indom as Charger, as well as some charts that with the models used, such as here, showcasing Spino is the smallest. Credits to Chomei and Python for this, since they are a lot better with this stuff than I am. Check out Python's channel if you want to learn about more Jurassic World content. He's pretty competent in that aspect. His height is just also backed up by a lot of pixel counts and other size charts they use to kind of directly compare the Indom, Giga, Rexy, and Spino. While some people will admit that CC is likely larger than JP3, we know that the JP3 Spino is already a full-grown adult regardless, and it's not insane, so I don't think Spino at best should be above 18 feet or anything, since that's the most reasonable cap for his height that we've seen, but likely maybe 16 or 17 feet, since very rarely is Spino cited above, at least in valid and official material. So in shortest terms in lengths and height, she is actually the shortest in terms of height, likely the shortest or second shortest in terms of length, and well, admittedly, she is likely the second or third heaviest. She's heavier than Rexy, likely heavier than Indom, but likely not as heavy as the Giga. But overall, Spino just has the worst size. He's not only the shortest and the second shortest in length, but while his weight is somewhat impressive compared to Rexy and Indom's, Indom is even debatable in a sense, and Giga is likely larger. So size, either A, just doesn't matter, or size in terms of that, Spino is losing, no matter what you think. There are some ratty scans that say that Spino is the largest carnivore, or Spino has higher stuff. But keep in mind, these stuff either just contradicts itself, as look at this scan saying, oh, Spino's this long, like 50 feet long, but is 4 tons. 4 tons? Do you want to believe the Spinosaurus is 4 fucking tons? But regardless, let's move on this. Once again, people are not really going to be happy with the sizes no matter what I say, but this is just what I view to be the most consistent in terms of all the sizes, as what's most consistently stated and what's stated in more valid material than simply a children's book or something. Now, let's move on to the inverse itself. Most people will try to argue that Spino's quote-unquote narrative, or the statements at the time, would imply it's being stronger than all of the Rexes, which just simply isn't the case. Maybe in 2001, as it's likely Spino is stronger than Bull, and some statements may imply that Spino is stronger than JP1 Rexy and Buck as well. But Buck does not have much inverse in terms of direct showings, though he does have the pretty impressive bust feat. But let's go over them now, not 2001, since we're in 2025. Not only does its statement of being the quote T-Rex killer strongest carnivore get contradicted by the most recent statements of Giga, Indom, and even Rexy having not only more when Spino was still alive, but more recent statements of being the strongest dinosaurs at the time, all stated somewhere between Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, or Dominion for each of them respectively. But we will get back more to this later. The main thing I want to talk about is Spino vs. Big Edie and Spino vs. Bull. Starting off with Spino vs. Bull, while Bull is a full-grown adult Rex, and Spino likely got stronger in CC, this is still a feat people like to mention, so let's just cover it and why it's really not all things considered. Obviously, once again, Spino is not only stronger, some people may bring up the blood Bull leaves, but sadly, the CGI is just inconsistent, as we see Spino's neck is fine right after. And you can maybe just argue the blood is from the blood already on Bull's teeth from having a little snap before. But Bull is not only a very small Rex, if not the smallest Rex we have seen on screen, even though he is once again definitely a full-grown Rex. Bull is likely only 14 feet tall, 37 feet long, and 6 tons according to some calcs, and maybe 7 to 8 tons. Either way, smaller than Rexy by a huge amount, smaller than Buck, who's 8 to 9 tons tall and probably 18 feet tall, and somewhere in those 40 feet lengths. And definitely smaller than Big Edie, who's 9 tons, 43-ish feet in length, and admittedly a bit shorter at 13 feet. Either way, this tells us that Bull and Big Edie are not nearly as big as Rexy or any other of the big four, especially Bull. Bull is also likely a scavenger, aka implying it doesn't fight much. It's not really a good fighter, it's not competent at fighting, unlike someone like Rexy, who is a known fighter and has fought a lot of dinosaurs in this area. Which we kind of see in the film. Bull is just kind of snacking on something already dead. So it's not like this is inconsistent. Yet even this, that Bull is a small adult Rex and Bull is not really a fighter, he does well against Spino, all things considered. And their initial clash, he wins it, slamming Spino down with a strong grip on Spino's neck that isn't broken for a good bit of time, still keeping it on his neck, which Bull's still relative in their clashes, and even later on, just ramming Spino outright. Only then, Spino just gets a good hit on its neck and performs its famous neck snap. And so, once again, this feat is just kind of unimpressive, all things considered. Next is Big Edie, who once again, as we just mentioned, is still smaller than Rexy and our other big four to keep in mind. Yet once again, in their initial clashes, Big Edie wins every single one of them, overpowering the base Spino several times, or even the likely stronger Spino than he was in JP3, to the point where we see damage of a single bite doing a ton of damage to Spino. The only reason the Spino was able to win at the very end because the Spino caught Big Edie off guard, literally dragging its tail and biting its neck while it wasn't focused, something the Spino could literally never do in any other encounter when Big Edie was actually on guard. With every one of Big Edie's attacks or strikes on the two clash just end up with Spino being slammed down, and Spino isn't even off guard in this case. And even if Big Edie is likely tired, as Big Edie was fighting all the other dinosaurs, while Spino was either only fighting Big Edie or, like, at one point, Little Edie. And Little Edie doesn't even do any attack back to it. This idea is fully cemented by these several statements by the producers, stating things like the fact that their encounter is meant to showcase that the T-Rexes are avenging its previous loss in JP3, as well as the fact that they're just getting a win. And they're not only confirming that the mind control in Little Edie was just a non-factor, but Spino directly just acknowledges Big Edie as the Spino superior, and pretty much almost cucks down to him in a sense before Spino runs off, as his war was essentially meant to cement that, alright, you're the boss, you're the big boss man, yes king. But we also know if there weren't restrictions with, like, you know, the age rating of the show, Spino would have been covered in Rex bite marks, showing that Big Edie would be more powerful than the Spinosaurus. At the time of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and Jurassic World Dominion, Rexy on several occasions is said to be the strongest land carnivore around, obviously excluding the Indom and Giga respectively, who have their own statements of the sort as well. But this would not only include Big Edie, but the Spino, as the Spino is directly confirmed to be the same one from JP3, by, once again, the producers. Keep in mind, in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, he was just flat out unhealthy and weakened, and this weakened Rexy is still considered stronger than the Spino and someone stronger than the Spino. And while in JFK in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom he was weakened, not talking about Jurassic World or Jurassic World Dominion. Once again, another topic for another day. This would obviously apply to the Indom and Giga, who both just lay their hands and brutalize a Rex who eventually needs an upper hand from some other dinos and kind of just off-guards the two with. The Giga is arguably weakened due to his ragged tooth, and the Indom is arguably weakened as she does have some bit of injuries from her previous encounters, whether it be from the humans or the raptors. Though I would understand if you don't subscribe to these ideas. No matter how you look at it, both versions of Rexy are stronger than his Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom counterpart, and both versions of Rexy that Indom and Giga fight respectively are stated to be the strongest things at the time, excluding obviously them, which would apply to Spino and Big Edie, and Indom and Giga have these statements directly. In fact, some of these statements are just direct comparisons with the Spino, like some statements even saying that Rexy was the true queen compared to the Spino, or how Indom was the strongest dinosaur villain yet, just kind of outright comparing it to the Spino and just outright saying, oh yeah, these characters are stronger. These sentiments of these three still being the strongest on land is just kind of still cemented even as of 5 months ago, where Indom is called a unstoppable force, and Giga as of 2 months ago is called a unstoppable apex predator, and Rexy is the queen of the dinosaurs according to 8 months ago, all from the official YouTube account. So clearly, even just currently, the sentiment of the Spino is just that he's just not the strongest compared to these three. This is just outright consistent, as Rexy and the Rexes have outright the strongest bite force in the series. Indom would have this bite as it's in her DNA, and Giga and Indom both tank these bites several times, compared to Spino, who we know would just have several marks from Big Edie all over, and really can't take these bites, as we just kind of see visually too. Now, Spino is the smallest of the bunch, and Spino is the weaker when it comes to inverse. But to quickly cover the just general feats, I really don't think that Spino slamming through a nested wall is more impressive than the Indom's feats or Rexy's feats. Even just when it comes to calcs, they all kind of scale the same at the end of the day, all between like small building and building. So even that doesn't really matter. But something I will mention is that if anyone thinks the Spino can break their necks, which not only sees Spino just can't really break Big Edie's neck, just kind of forced to crunch down on it more like a bite. Can't really do the snap maneuver again when she was pretty easily in a position to do so, but she clearly couldn't. Not only does Rexy being bit constantly on the neck to the point where Indom was just constantly biting and slamming its neck, to even slamming full force onto the Rex's neck and slamming it down into like a small little hut. Once again, Indom is directly larger and stronger than the Spino, and still could just get up later on and proceed to slam Indom through buildings. Indom, while weakened and barely able to stand, took the Moza clamping down on its neck while literally jumping up from the water. Which the Moza is not only the just outright strongest creature seen in the films, just flat out. He is 30-ish tons, a bit lower maybe, likely over 100 feet long and 55 feet tall. Definitely a lot more impressive than what the Spino can do. With the Giga could kind of take Rexy charging and biting right into its neck, and only died because Claws of the Theory was, stabbed into him, which these are the strongest claws in the series after all, as kind of directly stated. But let's go to their fighting styles, battle IQ, combat, all that stuff. Spino probably has some of the least experience, likely the least out of all of them. Well, we do know he likely hunted off-screen random Rexes off-screen. He only has really fought to quote-unquote 3 Rexes on-screen, one of them literally barely counting since this one isn't even a fighter and just kind of is a scavenger. Rexy obviously has more experience, no one's gonna deny that. Rexy's fought the Indom, the Turbo, the Giga, so on. Indom, while rampaging through the island encountered a lot more guns, a lot more varied fighting styles and tactics and weapons than the Spino, and displayed just being around longer, and its fighting style was also displayed here, which we'll get into later. Giga has fought actual Rexes who know how to fight, and according to the producers, fought and beat Buck and Doe off-screen in likely a 2v1. And also fought the Theory, who has the strongest claws in the verse, making Spino's claws, which he used once, by the way. In terms of actual fighting styles, if you kind of look into it, Spino sucks. His fighting style is very simple. Go for the neck. Practically 99% of the time when Spino is going to attack someone, it's aiming for the neck with his mouth wide opening. Literally every single time in the bullfight is he snapping his jaws wildly to the point where he's snapping air half the time and rushing at his opponents blindly to go for the neck. I found one time in CC where he used his claw and tail in a fight instead of directly trying to go for the neck against the little Edie. This just won't work against the other's fighting style. Indom specifically, who has a very interesting fighting style where we see they will learn an opponent's style and then adapt to it and counter it. We see this when she figures out she can't bite through the Yankee's hide. She slashes its leg and flips it over, allowing it to get the clean kill. When she realizes Rexy's bite force is kind of overpowering her a bit, she uses her claws to prevent Rexy from using her jaws. And once the Indom sees this really obvious strategy Spino was doing, she could probably just counter it with ease. Even the same way she countered Rexy would work here. It's not like Spino is going to be able to take the same beating Rexy took without just either being crippled or dying. The Giga is a very similar case where we just see Spino's fighting style just doesn't work against the Giga, who's very much a brawler and a bruiser. As we see with Rexy, he simply doesn't let his opponents go for things like the neck. Honestly, in my opinion, he's just the most relentless fighter that we see. If Giga even does the same move where he goes for the spot where he goes for Rexy's leg and kind of forces Rexy on the ground to make Rexy slower, like we see, It would probably do the same thing to Spino, and even if we could assume Spino could just snap Giga's neck for some reason, this would probably make it very hard for Spino to actually do that. As well as if you see just Giga just doesn't let Rexy get a hit. Rexy got one hit through the entire fight. Even if you want to say Rexy is older here, Rexy is still stronger than Spino, and people stronger than Spino outright in this film. And for Rexy, we see even though Spino is supposedly a notoriously good Rex hunter, he struggles a lot against the fighting styles of even the scavenger Rex. As once again, all Spino did to Bull was just go for the neck, like desperately, and Bull just kind of was arguably winning every time Spino tried to do that until Bull was caught lacking at one point. Big Edie just, every time Big Edie was on guard, just overpowers the Spino when the two clash. Big Edie slams Spino into the water. When the two are clashing again, Big Edie just bites on Spino's neck and Spino cries out in pain. So on and so forth. So Rexy should not have any problem dealing with this whatsoever, especially when Rexy has dealt with opponents with much more complex fighting styles. And the Spino is very simple, go for the neck style. Overall, Spino is pretty undebatably the weakest of all of the big four between the Indom, Rexy, Giga, and Spino. Spino is simply just portrayed to be as the weakest, even if what is portrayed in 2001 was not the original intent of the creature. Thank you for sitting down and watching me ramble about dinosaurs. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and sharing this around. And if you want to see more Jurassic content, then hey, leave it in the comments, and maybe I'll do another one. Maybe I'll do Giga versus Indom. Maybe I'll do, I don't know actually, but we'll see. Peace.